There are reports now that the NPA is considering prosecuting the former Gauteng Health MEC Qedani Mahlangu and the former Director of Mental Health in the province, Dr. Makab Manamela, for only 2 of the deaths in the Esidimeni case. At least 144 mentally ill people died after Mahlangu and other officials insisted they be taken out of the Life Esidimeni facility and placed with, in many cases, unlicensed NGOs. A mediation process held with the families and chaired by the former Deputy Chief Justice Makab Manamela heard testimony about how so many of these people died hungry, scared and alone. Sasha Stevenson is the Executive Director of Section 27, which has been supporting the family. Sasha, a good afternoon to you. I have to say, I battle to understand this. We know how many people died. We've seen the agony of their families. We understand some of the agony of what they went through. How can the NPA come to this idea that the deaths of only 2 people can be prosecuted?
Well, thanks, Stephen. I mean, firstly, the NPA hasn't actually come to any decision yet. What's happened is that they've told us that they have sought a legal opinion from a senior counsel that recommends prosecution of Ms. Mahlangu and Dr. Manamela for the deaths of 2 mental health care users. But the NPA still needs to make a decision as to whether to prosecute. And so we are still waiting, unfortunately, for that decision to be made. And they now have the inquest finding, they have the arbitration finding, they have 66,000 pages of evidence through both of those processes. And we now know that they have a senior counsel opinion that says there can be a prosecution. So we're hopeful that there will be a prosecution, but it's been a long time coming. And as you say, it's a disappointment that it seems that the most likely outcome would be prosecution only on the basis of 2 of the 144 deaths.
I would imagine most of the other families might think that the lives of their relatives aren't as important as these 2 people. Now, I understand there are legal technicalities within all of this, but I'd imagine the NPA might have a duty to explain, if it takes this decision, kind of how they get there. Whatever they do, they're going to have to explain it.
Absolutely. They are going to have to explain it. And it is very difficult for the families of the vast majority of mental health care users who died under similar circumstances as the 2 whose deaths may be prosecuted. It's difficult to understand why their deaths shouldn't be the subject of prosecutions. We know that so many people were moved into places that couldn't possibly care for them, that the Department of Health knew that these places couldn't possibly care for them, and they died in circumstances of severe neglect, of dehydration, with gangrene, with bed sores, without food, having lost a huge amount of weight. And so the size of this disaster is such that it's difficult to understand why there should be prosecution only for 2 deaths. That being said, we need prosecution. It's important for families and everybody in South Africa who's been watching this case for such a long time to see some measure of personal accountability. And we hope that this is a step, at least in the right direction, by the NPA in making that decision on prosecution.
From your knowledge and experience in this case, from your conversations with the families, is there anything that stands out about the 2 cases that might make it easier to prosecute Mahlangu and Manamela for those 2?
Well, these were 2 particularly dramatic cases, I suppose. Is not the right way to put it. But they're cases where there is a lot of evidence about their health, both before they moved and after they moved, and causes of death that very directly indicate neglect and the circumstances in which they died. And of course, that's not the case for everyone. You know, unfortunately, part of why there is an absence of evidence in respect of some of the deaths is because the proper processes weren't followed, because there weren't the kind of health and other assessments that there should have been before people were moved out of Life Esidimeni. And there weren't those processes and those assessments because the process was being rushed. And there was this big drive to move everybody out of the facility and into NGOs that were going to be cheaper for government, but that had no chance of caring for the people that they needed to care for. So that is the really unfortunate irony, is that some of the lack of evidence is because itself of the disaster. That being said, you know, families were very clear with the NPA that they have a lot of information. They've provided that information to, for example, the arbitration. They've spoken about their experiences visiting their loved ones at Life Esidimeni shortly before the moves, and then at the NGOs a little while after the moves, and seeing the dramatic difference. So it's not just medical records, it's also the experiences of the people who have been now fighting for almost 10 years for justice in this case. And what the families made clear to the NPA is that that experience, that evidence also needs to be taken into account. And the NPA indeed has undertaken to consider that as well.
You talk about the length of time that this has taken, and I understand that we must get the law right. I have often, and I ponder this as a journalist, not as a lawyer, how on earth the NPA can take so long. I'm not aware of anything that would have required them to go through all of these other processes before lodging a prosecution case. Now, it might be easier to prosecute now, but the fact is I do sometimes wonder if, with this and maybe some other cases, if there's an almost deliberate dragging of feet. Now, that might be unfair to the NPA, but if I, as a journalist, believe that, I can't imagine how the families feel about it.
Well, indeed. I wonder that as a lawyer, not a journalist as well. And certainly the families expressed just that concern when meeting with the NPA, that it feels like there has been really an unnecessarily long delay in this case. The inquest judgment came out in July 2024. It's been more than a year now. In most prosecutions, there isn't an inquest to consider, first of all. There hasn't been a full consideration of all of the evidence by a high court judge. Now, of course, there's a different standard of proof, but nonetheless, there was this consideration. There certainly isn't usually, as far as I'm aware, a senior counsel opinion that's sought. So it does feel like it's taking a very long time. The families are very frustrated. They are asking questions of the NPA. But at the same time, they are grateful that the NPA came and spoke to them, has indicated that they're moving in the right direction, and seems to have some sort of renewed energy when it comes to this prosecution. So they've said that there is a new prosecution team that's been appointed that's going to consider the various pieces of evidence in this case, and we can only urge that they move more quickly than they have. It's been too long. The families are frustrated. We need to see justice in this case. It's only fair.
Sasha Stevenson, thank you, Executive Director of Section 27, which has been trying to support the families in this case.